Hi friends, welcome to my channel. In today's video, we will be setting up my January reading journal. I read a total of 9 books this month, so this is gonna be a long video. Grab a warm cup of tea or coffee or your favorite beverage and join me as I set up my journal. As always, I'm gonna split up my video into chapters for each of the books so you can always skip to your favorite spread. I will try to link as many of the materials that I used on the description below. I will also link the setup video for this journal in case you want to refer to it. So now let's dive in. As I go through my annual spreads, you'll notice that I have pre-populated some of the books that I read. The first annual spreads is my bookshelfie, and this is where I basically write out the name of each of the books that I read. I also tend to color code these books by a color scheme, so each month I group them by the same color. This color schemes continues on my Goodreads challenge spread as well, so that I can quickly see how many I read for the month of January versus February and so forth. The next annual spread is my alphabet challenge, and that is where I read a book that starts with each letter of the alphabet. January is always a fun month because every single book that I read, I actually have a letter to fill out. So the letters that I already filled out as of this month is A for All Boys Are on Blue, E for Enchanted Greenhouse, J from James, M for Morning Star, N for No Heaven for Good Boys, O for Onyx Storm, S for Stolen Queen, and W for Where the Library Hides. The next challenge is my book bingo, and I feel like I made this a very easy challenge because I've hit a lot of squares so far. The first one is read a debut author, and for that one I read Academy of Villains. The next one is read a book that is set somewhere you'd like to visit. For that one I read Where the Library Hides, and it's set in Egypt, and I've always wanted to visit Egypt. Next one is read a band or challenge book, and I read All Boys Are in Blue. The next one is read a book with one word title. For that one, I read the book James. Next one is Book Talk Made Me Read It. For that one, I read Onyx Storm. Read a book inspired by real events. And the book I read for that prompt is No Heaven for Good Boys. One is a 2025 release, and for that I read The Stolen Queen. And the last one is read a book with a shocking plot twist, and for that I read Morning Star. The next reading challenge that I do is the Buzzword Readathon, and that's a challenge where you basically have to read a book that contains one of these prompts in the title. So for the month of January, I was able to read 2 of those prompts. The first one is Violent Words, and for that I read the book Academy of Villains. And the second one is titles featuring alliteration, and for that one I read All Boys Are in Blue. Favorite book this month was James by Percival Everett. Next up is my series tracker, and I read 3 books that belong to a series. One is Morning Star for Red Rising, Onyx Storm for The Empyrean, and Where the Library Hides for Secrets of the Nile. Next is my physical library tracker, and I read 4 books that I physically own. Now, I thought that I hadn't written down the book James, even though I owned a physical copy of it, but turns out I had already written it down. I had already marked it as read, and yet I forgot, so now I have 2 James in this spread. Next up is my ARCs, and it's gotten out of hand, you guys. It's only January. This is insane. I should really stop requesting books. Next one is Read the Rainbow, and I read a book whose cover is green for No Heaven for Good Boys and one that is black for Morning Star. Next up is my historical fiction book club, and the book that we read for January was James, and I really liked it, so I gave it 5 stars. Next up is my reading goals, and I read 2 countries in Africa, or technically 3 books that were set in Africa, but 2 of them were in Egypt, so I just counted as 1 country. And then I did read more from my physical library than the public library, which is good. I failed to read a sub book of the month for the month, and then my NetGalley ratio has gone to shit, so it's like somewhere around like 30%, I'd say. I hit 5,000 followers on TikTok, so that was a big milestone this month. So thank you so much if you're following me, and don't forget to subscribe and follow in any of my social media channels. So those were some of the annual spreads that I have set up for 2025. Now let's jump into my January cover page. I'm starting off by making a border It was a little bit of an adjustment going from a B5 size journal to an A5, especially when it comes to these cover pages. My normal layout was always to have like a nice image on one side with the name of the month, and then on the other side it would be primarily a bunch of stats and then a list of the books I read. But with the A5 size, that is a lot smaller, so I had to kind of like readjust, and I want to like revisit the way that I do my cover pages. I almost feel like maybe I should just have one cover page at the beginning and then do my stats at the very end. I'm just worried that I'm going to run out of space really quickly in this journal, which may not be a bad thing because I'm really struggling with this journal. I'm not a huge fan, so I wouldn't mind switching to another one. I wanted the theme for this month to be very pastel colors, clean, soft. So I ended up using a sticker sheet from Paper Media Studio. And I also ended up using the washi tape from the washi tape store for all of the letters of the alphabet. I feel like each year or so I have a store which is like my favorite, and I've been on a Paper Media Studio kick lately. I purchased her January drop with all the teddy bears, and it was like the cutest little thing, so I can't wait to like actually use it in one of my sprints eventually. So I first spread the stickers all over, and then I went in with my Micron fine liner to kind of create sections where I would showcase different stats. And I tend to group my stats into 3 categories. The first one is related to the author, and this includes their gender, their nationality, their race. And the second section is focuses primarily on the genres of the books that I read. So this shows the distribution between fiction versus nonfiction, if there was an LGBTQ plus representation, adult versus YA, and then also the actual genres. And then the last section is kind of like a catch-all for my rating, and then also the format in which I read the book. It's always nice looking back into every month's stats and see how my reads for that month differed from the other ones. Sometimes I'm pretty diverse in what I read, and then other times it's just no diversity at all, which is kind of sad. So I try to be a bit more active in terms of the books that I read for each month. Like I mentioned earlier, the A5 size in this journal has limited a little bit my cover page, I would say. So I kind of did like a half cover page and half books I've read section. So I combined the books I read with the official cover page, if you want to call it, for that month. I then use my Tombow dual brush pen. I think this is the 990, and it's a very light beige color, so I just use that to color around the boxes. So when I first set up this spread, I didn't really know how many books I was going to read. Usually I average around 7 books a month, and so I only made enough lines for 7 books total. However, I ended the month at 9 books, and so I kind of crammed book 8 and 9 at the top with the rest of the other ones, so it's not every single line for one book. Now, in terms of the stats author, 3 of the books that I read were written by male authors and 6 were written by female authors. 5 of them were white, 3 were black, and 1 was Latina. And then they're all from the US. In terms of the genre, 8 of them were fiction and 1 was nonfiction. 8 didn't have any LGBTQ plus representation, 1 did. 6 were adult, 3 were YA. 4 were historical fiction, 3 were fantasy, 1 was sci-fi, and 1 was memoir. In terms of star rating, it was a pretty good month. 4 of the books I rated 5 stars, 3 I rated 4 star, and 2 I rated 3 stars. 2 of the books that I read were in physical format, 3 were an ebook, and 4 were audio. 3 of the books that I read for this month were ARCs from NetGalley, so I feel pretty good. I was able to review those 3 books, and I was like, oh great, my hit ratio is now back to like 85. And the next thing I know, I got approved for like 20 other books, and I was like, well, crap, never mind. So this was my cover page for this month. I'm really happy with how it came out, even though I was limited by the small space that an FI journal has. But I love the colors, it feels so serene and peaceful, and I love coming back to look at it sometimes. The first book that I read in January is Morning Star by Pierce Brown, and this is the 3rd book in the Red Rising trilogy. I felt like Morning Star was like a really good conclusion to the Red Rising trilogy itself. I still haven't read the next books, but this is probably like one of my all-time favorite series. I found this fan art on Pinterest regarding the 3 main characters, and I kind of just like cut it apart and glued it in different areas of the journal to make it a little bit more cohesive as a spread. For the title, I used some scrap black paper pad that I had, and I wrote out Morning Star in the same font that the book cover has. I started off with a white jelly roll, and then I just went around it with my blue jelly roll. The plot begins a year after the traumatizing end of Golden Sun, which if you've seen my December reading journal setup video where I talk about this book, you'll know my feelings about it. The author weaved an intensely unpredictable storyline through his empathizing characters, devastating betrayals, deadly political machinations, and space opera bloodbath. Now, I don't want to talk a lot about this book because I'm always worried that I'm gonna give out spoilers accidentally, but instead I wanted to read you a quote from the author that kind of gives you an idea as to what the book is about. Whatever you're told, being an adult doesn't mean you have control. No matter the power you have, the money you make, the age you become, we all feel a little bit at the mercy of something else. The government, banks, chance, illness, our bosses, etc. That's what Darrow is dealing with in Red Rising. The fact that any control he thinks he has over his own life is a mirage. I ended up doing graphic audio version for the 3rd book, and again, I really love it. They've done an excellent job at narrating the series, so I highly recommend it. If you haven't read Red Rising yet, please prioritize it. You're not going to regret it. The next book I read is The Stolen Queen by Fiona Davis. This is a historical fiction book, and I received an ARC from NetGalley. I was really looking forward to this book, I'll be honest. It was one of my most anticipated releases this month because it sounded like right up my alley. The story travels seamlessly between 1930s Egypt and 1970s New York City. At its heart are 2 unforgettable women. Charlotte, a former archaeologist whose promising career was shattered by a devastating loss, and Annie, a determined young assistant navigating the vibrant yet chaotic world of the Met Gala. Charlotte's quiet life as a curator at the Met is appended when a valuable artifact tied to Egypt's enigmatic female pharaoh, Hathorkar, vanishes during the party of the year. The theft forces her to confront the ghosts of her past as her journey with Annie leads them back to the Valley of the Kings and the secrets she had left behind. The first half of the book was extremely strong. I was immediately hooked. However, the ending of the book brought down the rating for me. I found it anticlimactic, and everything was wrapped up in a bow too quickly, too perfectly. Too many loose ends were tied up all at once, so it didn't really give the reader the time to really sit with each revelation. And then the revelation of who was behind everything came out of nowhere. I must say though, the archaeological aspects, in particular, felt like a love letter to those of us who grew up imagining ourselves uncovering buried treasures and lost histories. In terms of the spread, I found this gorgeous fan art on Pinterest of an Egyptian pharaoh, and I just split it into 2 parts and I kind of glued the edges with it. One thing is that I did do a newbie mistake in that I didn't distress the edges after I cut it, but then I realized only after I had glued the image in, and I didn't really want to remove the image. So I kind of just went in with my distress ink around the edges to give it a little bit more of a brownish hue to it. I then went in with my stamps to type out the title, The Stolen Queen. I've been really loving the stamps. They make every spread look so fun. I then used my distress ink one more time to vintage up this little piece of paper, which is where I'll write out the stats that I track for each book each month, and that is the author, the genre, when I started and when I finished it, and what rating I gave it. I also used some of the Papermint Studio stickers to kind of go around and fill up any empty space. I went in with my stamps to stamp out A, G, S, and F. However, I underestimated a little bit the size of those stamps, so they are overflowing a little bit. The stickers were a little bit too wide and they were standing out from the page, so I vintaged it up a little bit with my distress ink. After I wrote down the review, I felt like it was still missing something, so I just added a bit of a border at the top and at the bottom. And then I also added a few more stickers from Papermint Studio near the bottom part. The next book I read is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This is a memoir manifesto and designed to encourage queer Black boys to uncreate the layers of their masculinity and racialize existence. It's an effervescent interrogation of compulsory heterosexuality and crashing gender-centric expectations, a kaleidoscope of intergenerational storytelling and cultural connectedness. It's a testimony, a love letter to Black queer bodies. This book teaches Black boys and gender nonconforming individuals to subsist in a world that seeks to build them out of it. For this spread, I used some floral washi tape from the washi tape store, and then the pink pet tape is from London Gifties. This memoir was pretty difficult to listen to, but it's such an important reminder that you are loved, you do belong. What baffles me the most with this book is the realization that heteronormativity and homophobia sit so deeply within society that even when you have a loving and queer-friendly family and friend circle, you will fear and avoid coming out, to yourself as much as to others, for decades. It makes me sad that this book is banned in various states, because there's a young queer Black boy out there that needs to read this. There were so many powerful quotes in this book that I had to write down in my journal. One of them is, navigating in a space that questions your humanity isn't really living at all, it's existing. We all deserve more than just the ability to exist. If any of my queer friends are watching my video right now, I do want to say that you are loved and you do belong. Another powerful quote that I wrote down is regarding symbolism. It says, "Symbolism gives folks hope, but I've come to learn that symbolism is a threat to actual change. It's a chance for those in power to say, look how far you have come, rather than admitting, look how long we've stopped you from getting here." I had a little bit of an empty space next to the title at the top, and so I thought this pink butterfly pet tape from London Gifties would be a great addition to it. The next book that I read is James by Percival Everett. If you haven't heard about this book yet, I don't know, have you been living under a rock? Because this has been the talk of the year. I was very grateful that our historical fiction book club decided to read this for our January pick because it was an incredible read. Everett takes the story of Huckleberry Finn and flips it on its head, making the enslaved man Jim the narrator, although Jim thinks of himself as James, and has a rich interior life to which his white enslavers are oblivious. We follow James and Huck on the same adventure Mark Twain outlines in his novel, but we see the action from James's point of view, which changes everything, and whenever the two main characters are separated, we follow James on his own adventure. One of my favorite things about the novel is Everett's depiction of how James and his fellow enslaved blacks talk. They are self-educated. James has secretly learned to read and write, sneaking books from Judge Thatcher's library whenever he can. They talk in exaggerated slave dialect so that the whites will not feel threatened. Jim is a persona, therefore a mask that James put on so he can navigate the impossible world he was born into. This was an excellent read, and I highly recommend it if you haven't read it yet. This book made me want to reread The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I originally read that book in Albanian, which is my native language, so I feel like I never really got any of the English connotations, like how powerful the English language is. And it also kind of made me realize that I read a lot of translated works, and sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. And it made me think, like, what else am I missing out by reading all of these translations from other languages from my Read Around the World challenge? I didn't really get much of the American history from what I remember. I mean, I also read it when I was in middle school, so it was a long time ago. But I wasn't really familiar with US history at that point in my life. And so I feel like it's going to be a great reread for me to do it in English and kind of compare how the two variants differ. The next book I read is The Enchanted Greenhouse by Sarah Beth Durst. This book doesn't come out until July, I want to say, but I was lucky enough to receive an ARC from NetGalley, so thank you so much. This was also one of my most anticipated reads this year because I absolutely adored The Spell Shop, which was the first book in this universe. And this is the second book in that universe. It has completely different characters and storyline. So if you read them separately, like, you're not really going to be missing out much on. At the heart of the story is Terelu Perna, who is punished for creating a magical sentient spider plant out of loneliness, which, if you read The Spell Shop, you'd know that this is Kaz. Her punishment, being turned into a wooden statue and left forgotten in a library, seems like the end of her story. But one winter day, Terelu wakes up in a mysterious, nearly deserted island filled with magical greenhouses where her journey truly begins. Cold, hungry, and uncertain, Terelu finds an unlikely ally in a grouchy gardener who offers her warmth, food, and kindness. As she explores the enchanted greenhouses, she discovers they are dying, their once thriving magic fading. Determined to save the island, Terelu teams up with her new friend and a witty sentient Rose to uncover the secrets of a long-lost sorcerer. Together, they face challenges that test their courage and resilience, proving that sometimes breaking the rules is worth it when it's for a greater good. Now, this is also a great cozy fantasy read, but I didn't really love it as much as I did with The Spell Shop. I felt like it dragged a little bit, and I don't know if this is because I read an early copy, so maybe the finalized version will cut out a few of these parts, but it was still like a pretty good read. All of the stickers that I'm using are from Pineberry Paper, and then the Gardener Girl, it's a pet tape from Will Washi Tape Shop. The next book that I read is No Heaven for Good Boys by Keisha Bush. This book hurt my soul. I cried. The plot is dark and depressing. We follow 6-year-old Ibrahima and his cousin Etienne through the streets of Dakar as they beg for money for their abusive teacher, Marabout Ahmed. In Senegal and other Muslim countries, young boys, the talibé, are sent to a man called a marabout to be educated in the Quran. To support the marabout, these children must spend their days begging in the streets for money and food. It is a relationship that is full of abuse and exploitation. The whole custom is a human rights violation, and I don't know how it's permitted to exist. This is a story of suffering by circumstance. All the characters, regardless of the power afforded them by wealth, status, or gender, from the marabout who abuses them, traumatizes, and neglects the children under his care, to the wealthy women who answer to their husbands, or Ibrahima's tension father, who must stay in his brother's good graces to preserve the family financially, are burdened by tradition and bound by paternalistic society, whose effects are compounded by the economic legacy of colonialism. Each faces a struggle to assert independence and determine their own fate, one way or another. Throughout this novel, there are sprinkles of Senegalese traditions and beliefs. There is a red bird that often appears to Ibrahima, who thinks it's his fairy godmother. I learned that pithis, or red-billed fire finches, are fielded in cages in the streets of Senegal. The locals purchase the birds and set them free as they believe it carries away sins and anxieties. All of the stickers in the spread are from Peppermint Studio. The next book I read is The Academy of Villains by Everett. I also received this as a free book on NetGalley. A captivating entry in the dark academia fantasy romance genre, blending elements of Greek mythology with a magical academy setting, the story follows Chiara, a former assassin with a hidden magical gift, as she infiltrates a dangerous magic academy with the mission of assassinating Prince Lucian, a cursed royal whose life is entwined with the kingdom's dark secrets. The atmosphere of the academy is immersive, steeped in mystery, danger, and enchantment. However, the romance didn't quite hit for me. The enemies to lovers trope fell flat as it seemed to fall for her way too soon, and I found myself not fully invested in their relationship. The relationship just felt a little bit forced. That said, the magic system was phenomenal. The idea of magic taking form and a living grimoire providing spells to its mage was so fresh and imaginative. I wanted to see even more of how it worked and its potential within this world. The subplot about secret societies and their rivalries was also very intriguing, and I'm hoping future books explore their dynamics and history more deeply. I do wish the world building had been a bit more fleshed out. There was so much potential to immerse the readers in the world. I don't often say this, but I wish the book was like 200 pages longer. The pacing also left a lot to be desired. Sometimes nothing happened, and then everything gets packed in one single chapter. For this spread, I used the white and black Celestial washi tape from the washi tape shop, and I thought that this fit perfectly because Clara has Celestial magic, whereas Lucian has shadowy magic, so white and black. And then the pet tape that you see is all from London Gifties. The skinny washi tape with white and gold and black and gold is from Simply Gilded. The next book I read is Where the Library Hides by Isabel Ibanez, and this is the second book in the Secrets of the Nile duology. I wanted to like this book so badly. I adore the concept of anything Egyptian mythology, and the first book earned a solid 5 out of 5 for me. but this one had so much going on that I just did not enjoy it. The titular library isn't even introduced as a plot point until like 65%, 70% way through, which confused me. Plot and storyline were all over the place. What really bugged me was the characterization of our main duo. We have Whit, who is supposed to be this swoon-worthy, brooding, and complex love interest, but instead remains a bit of a thumb with zero consistent personality traits, and even less chemistry with Inez. Our female main character, Inez, is supposed to be a strong, courageous, and slightly headstrong young woman who values her independence. She is, in actuality, a complete airhead with no impulse control who makes ill-informed decisions after decision to the point where I was barely rooting for her by the end of the book. She also spends most of the book switching between diving headfirst into plans without telling anyone and daydreaming about Whit, who she's known for about 2 months and doesn't know a single thing about. There's something that happens in the beginning of the book which completely ruins the character of Whit for me, and I don't want to spoil it or anything, but it just made me have zero respect for him or even Inez. That entire plot felt completely unnecessary and could have been solved in an instant had these two characters chosen to sit down and be honest with each other. In terms of the spread, I had some scrapbooking paper, which was kind of vintagey, and so I cut it up to create the corners. And then I used my stamps to type out the word library and then where the library hides. All the pet tape is from London Gifties. After writing the review, I did have a bit of an empty space at the bottom because I guess I ran out of things to talk about the book, and so I decided to just add a little bit more decoration down there. The script washi tape is from Villa Beautiful, I believe, in one of her very, very old drops a while ago, and then the brown washi tape is from Paperminty Studio, and then the pet tape is from London Gifties. And now we arrive to the last spread of this month, which is probably the one you're most looking forward to, and this is the Onyx Storm. I wanted this spread to kind of fit the previous spreads that I've made for Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, so if you've seen those on my Instagram, this is kind of how I approached it. So first of all, you're gonna skip one set of pages and then go to the second one because you want to make some kind of a Dutch door look. This way, when we cut around the logo area, you can kind of see the backdrop behind it. Now, this spread stressed me out so much. I wanted to do a watercolor painting wet on wet. However, this paper is the worst paper I've ever had to work with, and the water dried right away, so I couldn't really do a wet on wet technique. And I kind of just made do trying to make a gradient without that functionality, and so it was very frustrating to work with. And then after the watercolor dried and I went in with my Posca markers, the paper started piling up a little bit, so I was kind of worried that I was gonna, ruin the entire journal just on this one design. So it was a little bit more stressful than working with my previous journals from Archer and Olive or Notebook Therapy. So just keep that in mind if you are doing any kind of watercolor art or painting in your Lila journals. Wet on wet is not gonna go, or anything watery. I don't think it handles watercolor very well, so I wouldn't really recommend using watercolor going forward. Also, I apologize if you see my head pop up quite a lot throughout the spread. I just could not see the lines that I had drawn with pencil beforehand, so I needed to zoom in quite a lot. So I basically wanted to mimic the cover page for Onyx Storm, which has a lot of grays and a lot of blacks and a lot of gold. So I used my Posca markers to create the black, anything black, and then I used my gold Signa Uniball Jelly Roll to do any of the gold things. As you're going to see later on, I do go over the gold parts with my watercolor because it just enhances the gold a little bit more, and so I think it adds a very nice touch to it. Now, I don't want to talk a lot about this book yet because it's pretty new and I feel like not a lot of people have read it yet, so I don't want to give out any spoilers or anything like that. So even at the end of the spread, when I do the final flip through, if you haven't read the video, please skip over that part or just don't read the text because I will have spoilers on the review that I did write down eventually. But for now, I'm just not gonna say much about this other than I didn't like it as much as the other books, so I'll just leave it at that. I was pretty carefree in terms of the watercolor part because I knew I was gonna kind of cut around it anyway, so I didn't really care to be very careful. My one motto when working with watercolor is to trust the process. It looks so ugly when you first get started, but then somehow it all comes together at the end. So even as you are like doing something like this, if you feel frustrated with the first version, just keep on adding more layers to it. I couldn't afford to add more layers to this journal, unfortunately, because like I mentioned, like the paper was ripping apart, so it didn't have the best effect that I would have wanted for that watercolor wash. But I mean, I just made do with what I had at the moment. Use my white Posca marker to kind of color in the font for the title of the book. I thought that it was not as strong as I would like, so I did end up going over it with some white gouache towards the end to make it pop up a little bit more. And then I also added more of a stronger black border around it to make it stand up a little bit more. And this is where I went in with my Calero metallic watercolors. I absolutely love these watercolors. They're incredible. They're kind of pricey, but they're so worth the money. I feel like I've gotten so much use out of them. And I really love all the different metals that they have. So I picked one of softer gold. It's kind of like a mix between gold and silver to color in the moon part. I also added some enhancements to the other gold parts to just make them stand out a little bit more. I then went in with my scissors and kind of cut around the paper so that I could create that Dutch door effect. Now be very careful when you're cutting close to the center, just in case you don't cut part of the binding. Sometimes it happens that I've also accidentally cut the ribbon. I don't know how, but yeah, just be very careful when you are doing this kind of cutting. If you want, you can also just use an X-Acto knife and a cutting board underneath it. So now that I have my Dutch door already created, I took some black paper from one of my Archer and Olive notepads and I just glued it in. I then went in with my gold jelly roll to create a little bit of a border. And this is a border that I had created originally for the fourth wing spread, so I decided to keep it similar to that one. Again, I use my watercolors to kind of give a little bit more of a standout to the border. I don't know what it is, it just makes it a lot shinier and a lot better looking. So those were all of the spreads and books that I read for the month of January. I hope you enjoyed it, and then maybe you found a new book that you might like and read in your future. Let's enjoy a final flip through of all of the spreads.